and then tell the joke. No, I'm kidding. Okay. Um, so, um, you heard about the guy who ate the food coloring?
No.
He was dying inside.
Oh no.
Okay. All right.
Uh,
All right. So,
that's your second. That's your second. That'll be your second profession. He's
okay.
shake,
Yeah. Yeah.
he's
Exactly. Won't be
shaking
my
his
first.
head. He's shaking his head.
Honestly, I got this joke from I visited someone in the hospital yesterday. They told me this joke. So,
Uh, well,
uh,
Nina laughed.
From
Nina
someone in
laughed.
the
everybody.
hospital told you that joke? That's even more preposterous.
I know.
I
That's
know,
even
isn't
worse.
it? That's how it goes. What can you do?
That's
And
like
All
that's
right.
like you're making
Nina,
that joke. That's
Ni-
like you're making that joke on Yom Kippur. That would be even worse.
exactly.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Well, Nina said she laughed, so that's good.
Okay, okay. All right. So now that that's out of the way, now we can go on to the actual class. So last week we started this very, very important subject that um, the foundation and the first thing that needs to be done in the service of God is to accept the yoke of heaven, as it's called, is to accept God as king and to be willing and able and ready to do whatever he wants, which was actually what we read in this past week's Torah portion. The Jewish people told God, Na'aseh, first we will do. The first thing is to accept to do whatever God wants. So as important as emotions are, as we have discussed multiple times, the most basic emotion that's required is really submission. Submission to God, submission to a higher power, submission to do what God wants. And to that extent, we started off with the meditation. The meditation was think about how naturally insignificant we are compared to the cosmos, the universe, compared to God Himself. Think about how great God is, and nevertheless, despite our how minuscule we are, how great God is, God chooses to stand next to us and watch us and see us and care about how we act. And therefore, one should never ever think, well, I'm just taking a personal action, right? It's just my own, I'm doing it in my own home, right? It's, like we live in America, right? Everyone should have freedom to do whatever they want. All right, that's an American thing, which is good because it allows us to practice our Judaism. But in our own personal Judaism, we should never think that we are just free to do as we want. We have to understand and know that God is always standing there. I'm sorry, my hair is long. I'm not allowed to cut it, so it looks a little crazy. But I'll be able to cut it next Sunday, anyways. So um, so though we have um, so though we have Um, I lost my train of thought over here. Yeah. So we have to we take this meditation. We think about how God is standing right there above us, and there, or not really above us, next to us, and therefore that gives us the that's the meditation that awakens within us this idea that we need to accept upon ourselves to do as God asks. Okay, so that was last week. Now the question is, okay, that's a great meditation. When should we be thinking of this meditation? When is this meditation? When am I supposed to do it? Is it just a morning thing? When is it? So let's take a look over here as we read inside the text, and we're in chapter 41. We're on page 497 in the Practical Tanya. And it says like this. Let's go here. So it says like this. You should think deeply about all of this at length, however much your mind and thoughts can grasp, according to your time and constraints. All right. So first he says is you should think about it as much time as you can. All right, but when he says lifnei a mitzvah, especially before studying Torah or performing a mitzvah, such as the daily worship donning talis and tefillin, is just an example. The point is that definitely one should think of it in the morning. I think he says elsewhere, but also think about it if you have the ability before you do a mitzvah, because it's a reminder of why you're doing that mitzvah. Now, it's a very quick and short meditation, but the basic meditation is that God is watching you. God is watching you, and looking to see what you're going to do. And when you do the mitzvah, you're fulfilling his will. Let's take a look as the practical Tanya here actually gives a great explanation to what's going on here and we'll describe this in a particular detail in a way that really helps. So he says like this: as we learned above in chapter 4, so that was what, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, the Torah was not merely given from heaven, it's a taste of heaven itself. The mitzvahs and the Torah text provide divine clothing into which every part of your consciousness and behavior can dress itself to access God's infinite light. So when you're about to observe a mitzvah or study Torah, it's important that you focus on what's inside the clothing, the divine will, and not let it be obscured by the clothing itself, the reason for the mitzvah and the details of its observance. In other words, if you do the mitzvah of lulav, and you're very, very focused on making sure the leaves are there correctly. You're very, very careful to make sure, and you know why we do it. It's so we agriculturally, we get prayers to stop the winds, what the damaging winds, but you forget that it's God's will. It's kind of like having clothing without a soul, right? We've explained in also the previous chapters how the kavanah, the intention of the mitzvah, is the soul of the mitzvah. Now, without the body, the soul has no place to go. So, obviously, without the actual mitzvah, the soul of the mitzvah is not really worth much. But nevertheless, if you just have the mitzvah without the soul of it, recognizing that it's the will of God, then you are missing a integral part as well. And that's what he's saying here. You can have the clothing of the mitzvah, but you want the inside of the mitzvah, which is the mitzvah is a commandment, the will of God. So let's continue. That's why the above meditation is extremely important before studying Torah, performing a mitzvah. Preparing yourself to worship Him and carry out His will in any fashion that might be required of a servant means that you are focusing on the mitzvah as an instrument of divine will, which is its core identity and inner energy. That's the core identity of any mitzvah. The core identity is that it is the will of God. If you take all 613 mitzvahs, that's the core of every single mitzvah. Every mitzvah expresses the will of God in a different way, but the core of it is, and what connects it all, is that it's the will of God. Even if the mitzvah has an obvious reason, such as don't kill or give charity, it's important that you accept God's sovereign authority and be conscious of the mitzvah's divine will before you focus on the mitzvah's reason or utility, because in that way you will access the inner light of the mitzvah, which is itself, in itself, powerful, transcendent energy. I want to just pause here. He's saying here, even a mitzvah that you understand fully, completely, don't steal, don't kidnap, don't kill, don't murder, I should say. Even those mitzvahs, once you do it because it is the commandment of God. This is something the Lubavitch Rebbe used to speak about a lot, how it's very important our mitzvahs have, we're doing them because God is commanding it to us. And here we have the mystical reason. The mystical reason is because without that, you're missing the core aspect of the mitzvah that is the will of God. And the Rebbe used to give a very practical reason as well, is that, which is really connected to this chapter as well, is that if you remove that, if you remove the will of God from the mitzvah that you're doing, then the red lines that you have in your life can always move. In other words, if don't murder is based on our own personal understanding, we may one day come to a place where we want to murder. For example, the Germans were very sophisticated. The Jews in Germany were very much assimilated. And nevertheless, the Germans, if you were in Germany at that time, they're very sophisticated. They cared about their pets to the end of the earth. But about certain human lives, they would murder them and they felt fine with it. They didn't bother their consciousness. That's because don't murder was completely subject to their intellect. And if they felt that they're vermin, they're human beings that are like vermin, they will kill them. We also have this today going on. There's forms of murder that goes on for patients who are terminally ill. Though one can make the argument, that murdering a patient that's ill is a form of compassion, um, it is still murder. You're still killing a human life. And even if someone is doing it to themselves, suicide is also not allowed. And and some people might say, well, maybe it'll stop here. These things, they never stop. There's always, what if soon we get to, I honestly can see a time where we'll get to a place where people will be allowed to put themselves down if they're too depressed. I mean, whenever you remove God from the equation, if there's no, in other words, without God in your rules, there is nothing nothing's set in stone, right? In other words, if it's just based on human intellect, human reason alone, then it all is always subject to change, and that has borne out by history. And so, therefore, in order for morals to truly remain morals, we need God in the picture. There's many books written on why people hate the Jews, and one of the reasons, the main reason that's given is because the other reasons don't really stand up to water, is that Jews represent bringing morality based on God into this world, not a morality based on human intellect, but the morality that is brought into this world based on God. It comes from the Jewish people, and despots and people who hate true morality, like the Nazis and other people, they want to get rid of us because we are, so to speak, the conscience of the world. We are a reminder of this Torah that comes from God. I also want to mention we're going to have a JLI course later in the year about the seven Noahide laws. Okay, there are seven commandments for all mankind. Okay, Jewish people have 613. There are seven commandments for all mankind. And they may seem to be very logical. Okay, they also have don't murder, don't steal, set up courts of justice, animal cruelty, family, respect to family life. All those things are part of their mitzvahs. But a very, very important point, as we're going to study in that course, is that it's very important that everybody keeps those commandments because God commanded it. In other words, it's not enough that someone keeps the seven Noahide commandments because they understand it, because then it's not fulfilling the mitzvah of God. It is only fulfilling the mitzvah of God if they understand that God commanded it. And that there's, again, a twofold reason for that we're discussing here. One is the one that Tanya here is mentioning, is that when you do that commandment out of the commandment of God, then you are imbuing the actions or the lack of action that you're taking by not transgressing with the divine light of God's will. And then secondly, as we're saying, as long as those commandments are based on human intellect alone, they are always subject and in danger of being abrogated and being changed as time goes on. But that is for a later year's course. So again, this concept here really applies to all mankind that we're talking about over here, even in their mitzvahs. But it's very important for us to know these two elements of any mitzvah that we do, even a mitzvah that we fully understand, it makes a lot of sense to us, has to have these two reasons. Number one is God's will, because that's what gives it its spiritual light, and number two is when we know it's God's will, we will not change it as time goes on. Um, Now, there's a lot of people out there who only want to do mitzvahs they understand, right? If they understand it, then they'll do it, or at least they claim so. Though when you delve deeply, a lot of these people are doing mitzvahs, even things they don't understand. Um, Obviously, what we're reading here tells us that if you're only doing it, what you understand, then you're missing out on obviously a key element of a mitzvah, which is a mitzvah is a form of worship of God. So, in other words, if you are just going to do a mitzvah because you understand it, then you're basically saying, "Oh God, that was a good idea. I mean, I could have come up with it myself because it makes a lot of sense. But it's nice that you mentioned it, and I'll do it because it makes a lot of sense, right? That's not really worship of God, right? That's worship of self. So it's very, very understandable that in order for it to be worship of God, it requires us to understand, even in a mitzvah that makes sense to us, that we are doing it because God commanded it. And one other thing I'm going to say about this, when you study in depth the traditions around every mitzvah, even the mitzvahs we understand, the more you delve deeply into it, you will find elements of every single mitzvah that is not understood. I'll say that again. Let's say, for example, even the commandment, do not murder, okay? As you study in depth the rules regarding murder, you'll find elements of it that will not make so much sense to you. And you would say, God, if I were to write this law, I would write it a different way. Now, human law obviously has a lot of flaws in it because it's written by humans. So why is God's law, does it seem not to make so much sense to us? And the answer is God makes his mitzvahs in a way that we don't fully understand them. Even the ones we understand, he always wants us to realize that the mitzvah is his mitzvah and not just what we understand. And so every single mitzvah actually contains elements of it that are understood and elements that aren't understood. Just some mitzvahs are more understood than they are less understood, and some mitzvahs are more not understood than they are understood. Okay, so for example, certain laws of kosher. Today we have different things we've come up to explain certain elements of kosher, but even the elements of kosher that we have explained, there's still many, many more elements of kosher we don't understand. So, for example, people say, all the I think, but they say, right, all the kosher birds are not birds of prey. It's not necessarily true, or there's no bottom feeders of kosher fish. Also not necessarily true. Mostly true, not entirely true. There are a couple, I forget which ones, bottom feeder kosher fish, okay? Maybe not bottom, those jellyfish, but there are bottom feeder kosher fish. So my point is, that though yes, generally the mitzvahs, many mitzvahs, we even if we come up with reasons for them, there are still elements of it that are not understood, and it's not a flaw, it's actually by divine design. God wants it that there are elements of the mitzvah we don't understand. It's a reminder to us that we are fulfilling it because it's his will. And with the sad, of course, if God commands it, it's obviously the right thing, even if we don't understand it. That's what we have to accept. We have to accept the frailty of the human mind and what we cannot understand, and ultimately we believe and accept what God wants about it. I'll give another example. Kosher slaughter. Okay, kosher slaughter we know is the most humane, right? But I'm going to tell you a secret. There are ways to do kosher slaughter that aren't so humane. Nobody does it. Okay? No, nobody does it that way. But I'm just saying there is a possibility within the confines of Jewish law. Technically, it's be very hard to pull off to do a kosher slaughter in a way that's not so humane. Um, so again, you read this and like, why isn't kosher slaughter all about being humane? Yes, but it's also God's will, or not also. That is primarily what it is. It's God's will. It is also humane, but it is primarily God's will. And so therefore there are going to be elements of kosher slaughter that are not going to be understood. And the same thing as you delve into the laws of murder, or laws or stealing or anything, there are many ways around things. I want to add one more thing around one more point around this is I said a moment ago there are elements of every single mitzvah that are not understood. So even though there are reminders that they're God's will, there is still such a thing called the spirit of the law. And what I mean by that is there's a famous line by Nachmanides. Nachmanides says, he writes, a scholar from 800 years ago, he writes that if someone knows the laws of the Torah very, very well, they could technically be a horrible human being following all the rules. Okay? He said you can technically follow all the rules and be a horrible human being because you learn all the loopholes and you learn all the ways around it, and whatever you learn how to steal in a kosher way. It says that before the flood. Actually, I think the Medrash says this that before the flood, the robbery that people were doing, basically they would rob under a certain amount that's not considered according to Jewish law stealing. Okay, right? Under a certain amount, if it's not worth enough money, it's not considered. It's kind of like what do they have? They have laws in some states. If you rob less than a certain amount, you don't go to jail or whatever. So technically, in Jewish law, you have a similar concept. So they would rob always a half amount, and then they would come back and steal the next half amount, and come back and steal the next half amount. So there's always ways around anything, and he makes the point that one can technically be a horrible human being with the permission of the Torah, and he says that's why God says, I forget what line he quotes it on, you shall be holy or something like that. I forget the exact line, but he says the Torah commands us. There's still a spirit of the law. There's the technical laws, yes, but there still exists the spirit of the law, and we are enjoined by God to be holy. To be holy means not just find ways to exactly do what exactly everything it says, and not transgress. Even if you find loopholes and you find ways around things, we are commanded by God to be holy and to follow the spirit of the law. So those are my three kind of, they're not fully related to what we're talking about here, but they bring up this conversation in this idea of the concept here that really every mitzvah is the will of God, and that's why you will have many mitzvahs that have details that we don't understand. And my last point was, even if you can find ways around certain rules, there's still a commandment to follow the spirit of the law. Okay, so any questions or comments before I continue here? Nope. Okay. All right. Hopefully that was clear as day. All right. So let us continue. On the inside over here in his commentary on the Tanya. So again, this is not Tanya itself. This is commentary on the Tanya. He's going to reiterate what I said a moment ago, that even when we remember that it is the will of God, that alone is not going to connect us to God. It's the mitzvah that is the divine will, and that is what forms your connection with God. Kabbalah's all accepting the yoke of heaven opens you up and sensitizes you to the divine light within the mitzvah. It helps you focus on what the mitzvah is really about, and that's why you should do the above meditation before studying Torah, performing a mitzvah. All right. Um, all right. So until now, we had a basic meditation that applies to all mitzvahs. Okay. Now he's going to point out that in addition to the basic meditation that all mitzvahs are connecting us to God in a more general way. How so? Because we are fulfilling God's will. Then he's going to continue. There's also specific meditations to every single mitzvah. Now, he's not going to go through the specific meditations of every single mitzvah, but he's going to go through the specific meditations of tallit and tefillin. Why tallit and tefillin? It's usually one of the first things a Jewish male will do in the beginning of their day, and so that's probably why he's going to pick them. Um, so let's discuss the meditation of tallit. Someone says here, I don't think a person can fool God by kosher stealing. Um, yeah, you can't fool God. Question is, the point of Nachmanides is to say exactly that point. Don't believe that if you find a kosher way to steal, that God deems it kosher. God says, "Thou shalt be holy," meaning even in areas where there's technically no specific command, "Thou shalt be holy" is a more general command of a way we need to live our lives in the spirit of the law. Okay. Um, so let's go back to this meditation of the tefillin. So let's start with this question. Anybody knows what tefillin are made of? Any,
Leather?
huh?
Leather?
They're made of leather, okay. Cowhide leather, yes. And what's inside of them?
The parchment? No.
Yeah, there's parchments. How many?
Uh, well, I don't do tefillin wrap. Uh,
Okay, it doesn't mean right. Okay.
Roberto, how many? The only one here that does tefillin, not me.
All right, how many? Anybody else can jump in. How many? What? How many parchments are in the tefillin?
5? No?
I'm gonna have to do a live demo here. Let me show you.
Two?
What? What'd you say?
Two?
Two? Okay. Anybody else? All right. So here is the head tefillin.
Okay.
Now how many sections do you see?
Four.
4.
Four. Very good. So there are four sections in the tefillin. This is actually split like this because there's four separate compartments in here. Now this is the part that goes on the head. Show you in a second. The hand tefillin, actually, as you can see, is one compartment. Okay? So there's only one compartment in the hand tefillin, four compartments in the head tefillin. So how many sections are in the head tefillin?
Four.
And how many sections are in the hand tefillin?
One.
All right, it's a trick question. So the answer is that there are four compartments in the head tefillin, and there are four sections written in the head tefillin. In the hand tefillin, we also have four sections, but they're written on one parchment. Okay?
So it's
So,
5.
well, I guess if you're counting them all together, yes. I guess if you're counting the head and the hand together, it's five. It's five parchments, but it's still the same four sections. So you have the four sections in the head tefillin,
Yes, you
and
did say 5.
huh?
Oh, my husband said, didn't I say 5? And I said,
Okay,
yes, you
okay.
did say 5.
So there's five parchments altogether, but the sections, what's written in there, there's four sections of the Torah written in there. Um, and in the head tefillin, it's written on four separate sections. In the hand tefillin, it's written on one single parchment. Now let's take a look. What sections are written in there? Let's take a look. So we have here, we have Kadesh. So this is Exodus 3, 1 to 3:10. So let's take a look. 3:1. So this is Exodus, sanctify to me every firstborn. Then it continues, remember the day you went out of Egypt. The Lord took you out. Uh, and then it's talking, bringing us into the land of flowing with milk and honey. And then it talks about the festival of Pesach. So, and here it says, it shall be a sign upon your hand, a remembrance between your eyes, in order that the Lord of the law shall be in your mouth. that with the mighty hand of the Lord of God took you out of Egypt. So we have this section pretty much is a remembrance of the Exodus of Egypt, right? That's basically what we have here. One section that is in the tefillin. Okay? So remembering that God took us out of Egypt. All right, that's one section. Then we have really it starts the next verse. So that was verses 1 through 10. Then we have verses 11 to 16. And here it talks about 11 entering the land of Egypt. And again, it's talking about the firstborn belonging to God. And then again, the children asking about Egypt, and we talking about Egypt, and we end up here with verse 16. It shall be a sign upon your hand and between your eyes. All right, so those are two sections talks about Exodus of Egypt and the tefillin. Then we have the next section is the Shema. Okay, so verses 4 through 9. So we have here is the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you have all the way to the end where we talk about the mezuzah. Okay, so this talks about remembrance of God and that He's one, so nothing about the Exodus of Egypt, and talking about God constantly. And the final section written in the tefillin is 11, 13 to 21. And we have the second paragraph of the Shema, the one we say. So right when you read the Shema, Yivahaya im Shema Tishmu, the second paragraph of the Shema, and this is a reminder to fill all the commandments, and we read that all the way until verse 21. So it's the whole thing we read. So we have the Exodus of Egypt, the oneness of God, and accepting upon ourselves to fulfill what He asks of us. Okay, so that is what is in the tefillin. Okay. So we have, yes, we read two of these recently. So that's what's in the tefillin. Just want to say, as an aside, anybody who puts on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, which is, so let me just explain. So some people like myself put on two pairs of tefillin. That's because there's a debate as to the order of these sections in the tefillin between Rashi and his son Rabbeinu Tam. And so therefore I put on both pairs of tefillin to fulfill both opinions in which order they're written. So there's no debate what is written in the tefillin. There's only a debate what order they should be put in. All right, so with all this being said, hopefully now you have a better understanding of what the tefillin are. The tefillin are leather boxes. Within them are within these leather boxes are parchment. In the head tefillin, 4 pieces of parchment with 4 sections, and in the hand tefillin, 1 parchment with all the same 4 sections. These passages discuss the unity of God, the miracles God performed us when taking out of Egypt, how God has power over the worlds, and to fulfill all the commandments. So, mystically, as we're going to discuss, because we're getting into the Tanya, mystically, what is the mitzvah of tefillin? Is the 4 sections of the tefillin hint to our different levels of our intellect and the levels of our emotions. Okay, so really our intellect is comprised of 3 things: chokhmah, bina, das, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And knowledge, as we explained in previous times, is the part of our brain that connects our contemplation, our meditation with our feelings. And that's connected with the 4 sections of the Shema. And so the meditation we have when we put on tefillin is to connect our mind and our heart to God. That my mind and my heart should become a conduit for God's thought process, so to speak. Okay, so let us continue. So let's go over here. It says like this. The first meditation above was a preparedness and a simple willingness to let God into your life to accept God's sovereignty. A second phase, which you will aim for in the following 3 meditations, is a feeling of genuine reverence, a deeper connection when you progressively absorb and internalize the reality of God and pull upon yourself God's blessed infinite light. So he's been saying when the contemplation you have when you do an actual mitzvah is more in depth. And he continues, you should also contemplate how the blessed infinite light, which fills all the worlds and transcends all the worlds, is the divine will expressed in the undiluted fashion in the Torah you're reading and in the text and ideas, or in the tzitzis and tefillin you are putting on. And by reading this Torah text or putting on the assistance and tefillin, you pull upon yourself God's blessed infinite light. So not only, as he's saying, are you doing God's will, but you are actually pulling God's blessed infinite light into your life. And he's going to give an example with tefillin, what I just mentioned a moment ago, right? Tefillin have these four sections. These four sections correspond to the three areas. Really, they correspond to three areas of our brain, which are really correspond to two powers of intellect, which is wisdom and understanding, and then knowledge, which really is the love and awe of God. So that's how it becomes four. If you want, I can show you how they're connected. But let's continue. The way this works is that the light is pulled upon your divine soul piece of God above, which is inside your body and engages your body in the mitzvah act, causing you to be absorbed and lose your separate identity within God's blessed infinite light. So when you do a mitzvah, I guess I've described this earlier, if you ever take a small match and put it in a fire, that little match becomes absorbed in the larger fire. It's the same thing. We have a spark, a godly spark within us. And when we do a mitzvah, our godly soul, the spark is reattached to its bigger flame to God. And so we kind of lose ourselves in God's blessed infinite light. And so that's kind of the idea of tefillin. When I put on tefillin and I'm absorbing myself in God's thought and feelings, I'm losing my identity. As he continues, let's continue reading the commentary here. As your ego weakens and more of your inner being is receptive to God's light, you will begin to lose a sense of separateness from God. With each mitzvah, you open yourself up to the light, which is shining on you at that moment, rendering yourself translucent to the divine. Obviously, this takes a lot more spiritual work than our first meditation. It's a kind of phase 2 in your relationship with God, where the ego shifts from merely recognizing that there's a higher power and now aims to vacate its perception of separate self. You begin to shed the urge to do anything other than act as an instrument for God's divine will, becoming absorbed and losing your separate identity within God's blessed infinite light. So what he's saying here is the previous meditation that gets you to do the mitzvah is very different than the meditation you have when you do the mitzvah itself. In other words, first you have to accept upon yourself that God is king, but then you and God are separate existences, right? God is God, I am me, and I am submitting myself to God because he is the great God. I'm going to do what he wants. Phase 2, before you do an actual mitzvah, is you want to vacate, as he says, vacate yourself, so to speak. You want to become a conduit for the divine infinite light that is about to flow through and within you. And if there's too much of the I, if there's too much of the ego, if there's too much of you, then there's no space for God. So when you do the actual mitzvah, if you truly want to benefit from the mitzvah, you want to vacate yourself so you can allow the divine light and God's infinite light to really shine through you. Okay? And that applies to any mitzvah. He's giving an example here at tefillin. So for the ladies here, this applies really by any mitzvah you do. Okay? Tefillin is just his example, but really it applies by any mitzvah you do that you become at that moment the conduit for God's light. Now, every mitzvah actually brings God's light into your life in a different way, and therefore men and women are different, and therefore men have different mitzvahs, different elements of themselves that need to be refined that women don't, and therefore we have certain mitzvahs that we need to do to allow God's light in it that maybe women don't need. But the essential idea here is the same, is that every mitzvah brings the divine light into your life. Okay, we're not focused on the world now, which is a true point as well. When you do a mitzvah, you elevate the world around you, but on yourself, when you do a mitzvah, you are allowing God's infinite light to shine through a certain element and part of yourself. Okay? So let's continue. And that is why, by the way, the Zohar said earlier that the amount of mitzvahs corresponds to the amount of limbs and sinews in the person's body, because every mitzvah is elevating a different part of ourselves. They tell. I've heard this story before. I haven't verified it myself, but it just brings out the idea, is that there was once someone who was buried who had never put on tefillin, and they had to open up the grave for some reason, and they saw that the area where the tefillin were supposed to be was rotted out first, very quickly, very unusual. And we can explain because, again, it hadn't been elevated. Again, don't quote me on the story, just give me the idea, the example is that the tefillin elevate a different part of ourselves. That's the point. Every mitzvah elevates and allows God's infinite light to shine through a different element of ourselves. So now he says, in particular, the case of tefillin, contemplating that the chokhmah, inquiry, and bina, cognition, powers of the divine soul, should lose their identity and be absorbed in the chokhmah, which is inquiry, and bina, cognition, or understanding, as they call it, powers of the blessed infinite light. A mitzvah, as we have just seen, dissolves your body and soul into God's light. Tefillin targets the mind in particular, allowing your mental powers to be raised up and absorbed in God's mental powers. Since, as the Zohar teaches, God's chokhmah and bina take expression in particular in two of the four sacred passages written on the parchment inside the tefillin. I just want to mention this is why tefillin are generally, though they can be put on all day, generally we put them on in the morning. It says that we'll have an easier time tapping into that intellectual, spiritual light in the morning because it's a time when when the infinite intellectual light is expansive. We spoke about this in a different chapter, but anyways, put on the phone whenever you can, but ideally in the morning. Now it continues. All right. So we have one section of the tefillin is Kaddish, sanctify me every firstborn, the first of each womb, has the energy of God's Chachma, the first stage of divine emanation towards creation, which, like a womb, opens the whole flow of mercy and spirit supernal light. So here he's going to show you how the four sections of the tefillin correspond to these four spiritual, powerful lights that we want to embody within ourselves, which is Chachma, supernal wisdom, Binah, supernal understanding, Ahava and Yira, love and awe. So the first paragraph written in there is about sanctifying the firstborn. And Chokhmah, God's wisdom, is the first layer of God's infinite light. So it's considered the firstborn. Okay. Vahaya ki the next section is a time will come when you will be brought by God into the land of the Canaanites, has the energy of God's Binah, understanding, hinted by the fact that the Torah mentions the exodus from Egypt 50 times, which corresponds to the 50 gates of Binah. So there are 50 gates of understanding. It's a discussion for those who study the Zohar in depth, but the Kabbalists talk about 50 gates of understanding. And since the Torah mentions the exodus of Egypt 50 times, and here's your little fast Torah fact for today, right? Someone asks you the riddle. How many times did the Torah mention the exodus of Egypt? It seems like a lot. Now you know the answer is 50 times. Why? Because it corresponds to the 50 gates of understanding. When you exit your Egypt, you gain better understanding. So your personal Egypt. Then he continues, and so the result of your meditation on the first two passages of Tefillin should be the feeling that you're not going to use your soul's wisdom and understanding for anything other than God alone. In other words, why is my mind here? Why do I have the ability to think? Why do I have the ability to delve deeply and understand things? It's not so I could watch a YouTube video and understand a bunch of useless information about the world. Okay, you can watch YouTube videos if you have useful information that you want to know about the world. Okay, that's fine. I'm not taking that in a way, but we can go. You can spend your entire day on YouTube delving into the depths of science that really is never going to have any effect on your life. And though you may be gaining a knowledge, it's not going to change how you're going to act. And instead, you could have been spending your time delving deeply into Torah and into God's will and wisdom. And that's what tefillin reminds us: is we want to connect our unless doing otherwise is a mitzvah, saving lives, making a living, or whatnot. We should be using our mind for Torah. Was just a very general, important point. One of the Rebbe's issues with college, or any of these things, there's a general belief out there, and it has a basis to it, right? That colleges today want you to get a general knowledge base, and then go to your specific field. But sometimes you have some fields where people are going into where they literally have to study subjects that will make no difference to them, and they have to study them nevertheless because the colleges want people to be well-rounded. Now, well-rounded is great, but for us Jewish people, the ideal state of mind is we should not be studying secular subjects just for the sake of studying, because we have the Torah for that. Though we need to become worldly versed to a certain extent, but again, there's no end to that, because really there's no end to the sciences. There's so much you can study. And we only have so much time in our day and so much brain power. So what are we going to do with it? Are we going to spend it on understanding another piece of Rashi? Or are we going to spend it on understanding exactly how Mars one time had water and has no more any water? Or are we going to spend it on whatever. There's many details and science that you can learn that is fascinating and true and an expression of God's greatness. But we don't necessarily need to study it. I'm being very careful here because I'm sure a lot of you like to study a lot of the stuff I do as well. Not gonna say not. And by the way, you can when you're in the restroom, you can watch all the YouTube videos you want because you're not allowed to study any Torah. But putting that aside, or on some of the days of the year when we're not allowed to study Torah, putting all that aside, we have limited time here on this earth, and that's the question: what are we going to spend it doing? One can always spend. You can basically you can spend your life studying, but for a Jew, we should be studying Torah whenever and all possible. So if you have a more specific question in your life, should I be studying this or that, or is there a problem understanding this or that? No, so I don't have a problem. You need to learn about this. You need to learn about how dishwashers work because you have a dishwasher. You need to fix it. You need to learn about how washing machines work. You need to know how to fix it. That's fine. I'm talking about pure study for knowledge for the sake of knowledge. Though that's a beautiful thing, but for us Jewish people, we have a Torah that we should be gaining will and wisdom in. Now, of course, if you're in a field or you're a rabbi, you need to understand electricity. There's a lot of things we need to understand for Jewish law. But if it's just knowledge for the sake of knowledge, as you see here, that is not desirable. Let's continue. Worshiping God doesn't mean that you lose all sense of rationality and intuition. God doesn't want you to become a robot. He gave you mental powers so that you dedicate them to his worship. And putting on tefillin helps you do that because it floods your powers of inquiry and cognition with divine light. I don't know. He gave some explanation here. I'm not even sure. I just read that. That's commentary. Anyways, the point is that just because you're allowing yourself to be a conduit for God and for God's light doesn't mean you lose your sense of individuality. Every single one of us has particular talents, and our minds work in specific ways. And using our minds for God still is going to be done in our particular way. So, though we are dedicating our hearts and our minds to God, we are nevertheless, it'll be done in our unique way. In the second half of this meditation, we turn to the power of tefillin to refine your emotions, which is the second two sections of the tefillin. As we learned above, the transition from thinking to feeling takes place via agency of das. That's the third level of the brain, through which ideas become personally relevant, and this leads to the entire range of human emotions, which broadly speaking fall into two categories of chesed, love, giving, and gevurah, discipline, fear. So what he's saying here is like this. He's saying that the last two paragraphs of the Shema correspond to the third power of your mind, which is das. Now, das itself is in your mind. It's not emotions, but it leads to the emotions of love and awe. And that's what he continues. And similarly, you should contemplate how, when putting on tefillin, that your soul's power of das should lose its separate identity and absorb in God's das. And since it is das that gives rise to all emotions, beginning with chesed and gevurah, when your das becomes absorbed in God's, it automatically incorporates your chesed and gevurah, which are reverence and love, in your heart. When you put on tefillin, all this becomes absorbed in God's supernal das, which incorporates his chesed and gevurah. So what he's saying is that um, we put on tefillin on our head and on our arm by our heart. That's because, again, we're connecting our heart and our mind to God. So when people ask me, what is tefillin about? I always say very simply, it's about connecting our heart, our mind and our hearts to God. And that's really what it is. It's saying my mind and my heart will be a conduit for God's will and wisdom. For God's to think and to feel in godly things. The two other passages in the Tefillin express God's chesed and gevurah, which is kindness and judgment. The passage beginning, "Hear, Israel, you shall love," corresponds to chesed, kindness, love, right? V'hayim Shema, the passage of "and if you will listen," corresponds to gevurah, judgment. Since it speaks of divine anger, beware lest your heart be lured you away, then the anger of God will be kindled against you. And this entire meditation is really elaborated of the basic requirements stated in Shulchan Aruch, that when putting on tefillin, you ought to contemplate that you are placing your heart and mind exclusively in the service of God. So the code of Jewish law really states what we just said now. We just gave it a mystical way of looking at it. But I'll just pull up for you here. So the code of Jewish law actually tells you when you put on tefillin, this is exactly what one should be thinking. Let me see if I can pull this up. 25. 25:5. So again, the point is when I put on tefillin, I think about how through putting on tefillin, I am going to connect my mind and my heart to God. And how did I get so far over here? Um, oh, here it is. Okay. Let's take a look here. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. They don't have it in here. Okay. I must be looking in the wrong place. Anyways, okay. I'll leave that for now. Um, okay. Okay, here it is. Sorry, I found it. Here's from the Code of Jewish Law. One should have in mind when putting them on. God commanded us to place these four passages, which contain the unity of His name and the Exodus of the arm, and the Exodus on the arm opposite the heart and the head opposite the brain, so that we may remember the miracles and wonders that He did for us, indicating His unity and that He's omnipotent in heaven and earth to do with them as He wills, and also in order to subjugate to God one's soul which resides in His brain. So this is the part we're focusing on. Tefillin is to subjugate one's soul, which resides in the brain, as well as his heart, which houses one's main physical desires and thoughts. Through this, he will remember his creator and moderate his pleasure seeking. He should, yeah, and that's the point. You're subjugating your heart and your mind to the service of God. All right, so that is tefillin. So hopefully you understand a little bit better what tefillin are. Tefillin are four passages from the Torah. In the head tefillin, it's four written on four parchments. In the hand, it's written on one parchment. And the idea is that we are subjugating all the different layers of our brain, which also include our heart, our wisdom, our understanding, and our das, which gives birth to our love and awe. And we're saying that all of these will be used to serve God. Right? We say it in the Shema, "V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha," you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. That means we're giving over to God every part of our being. You know, we say this prayer every single day. Do we ever think about this idea? Is that we're truly accepting upon ourselves when we say the Shema, which is why it's so important, is that my entire being is here to serve God. Yes, through my individual spiritual abilities that God has given me, and mental capacity and emotional feelings. But we are here to be able to give God, to be able to serve God and to allow God to flow through us. That's really our goal in life. All right. So if that's tefillin is a reminder that we need to connect our mind and our heart to God. What about a tallis? So think about it. What's the difference between how we wear tefillin and how we wear a tallis? Any thoughts? Anybody has any thoughts? What's the difference between how we wear talis and how we wear tefillin? Yes?
Well, they're both actually wrapped around because you have the tallit, the man,
Yes.
around them, so they're both wrapped, I guess.
Okay,
One
good.
is
So
more
here
tightly,
one is more what?
tightly wrapped, tightly.
One is more tightly wrapped. Okay, getting closer. Yes. So I think, maybe you recall we've spoken about this before. The concept God has two kind of divine lights. God has a more encompassing light and a more specific light, right? We spoke about this when we speak about our soul, right? The spirit, the soul power that we're given really has two elements of soul power. One element of our soul power is generally that we're alive, and then the second power of the soul is the ability for each and every single part of our body to work. Okay, so this corresponds to God's more encompassing light or God's tailor-made light. And so we see this as well in the tallis and tefillin. The tefillin are more tailored. They're right here sitting on the head, they're right here on the hand, focused in a very specific area on the brain and the heart. Tallis, though, is what you're enwrapped in. Okay? So the tallis is focused on the more general encompassing light of God. Okay, so it's reminding ourselves to be totally engulfed by God. Let's take a look, read here inside. And when you're wrapped in talus, Adorma Tzitzis carry out the following meditation. It's somewhat perplexing. No, let's skip it. Um, Contemplate. Oh, whoops, sorry. Contemplate what is written in Zohar that when doing this mitzvah, you have to draw upon yourself God's sovereign authority. So it's that which is a more generalized, okay, more generalized feeling. In other words, not just connecting my specific heart and mind to God, but that in general, I am accepting upon myself God's authority. Um, upon your whole being. Okay, contemplate that even though God's authority rules over all the worlds, nevertheless he has specified his desire to be worshipped by us through the Torah and through observing the mitzvah. Your whole being will internalize this reality. Most mitzvahs have a specific theme relating to a particular element of worship, but even though it's just one mitzvah, the tallis has a theme of accepting God's authority and worshiping him in general. That's because the tallis engulfs your whole body, representing the alignment of your whole being. So tallis is a very interesting one. We know that tzitzis in general are there to remind us of all the mitzvahs. Tzitzis is a unique mitzvah that it's there to remind us of all the mitzvahs. So putting on the tallis is similar to the idea, you shall surely place upon yourself a king. The verse, you shall surely place upon yourself a king, implies that up until this point you were merely willing to have God as a king, but it is now when wearing a tallis that you are entering fully into that relationship. What he's trying to do here in the notes is explain what is the difference between this meditation when you're putting on the tallis versus the general meditation, accepting God as king, right? Remember, so we started off this chapter how we always need to meditate and think and remind ourselves that God is the king and we're accepting to do what he wants. So what exactly is unique in the tallis? And the answer is that again, this difference between there's me and there's God, or I'm fully subservient, or I'm allowing myself to be completely nullified within God. So the first meditation says, I am accepting to do whatever God says. There's me, I may not like it, but I'm going to do it. And the second layer is um, really giving over of yourself towards God, your entire being, not so much feeling yourself as a being willing to do what God wants, but you as a being now feeling like you are doing what God wants, if that makes any sense. That's the difference between tzitzis, talis, and the general acceptance of God's will and wisdom. The difference between feeling myself willing to do what God wants or currently doing what God wants in a very generalized way, which is the talis, because it brings the feeling of I am now subsumed within God's light. That's the difference between the two different types. Yes, we do wear a tallit katan, a small talis, and we also wear a big talis as well. We wear the small talis because we always wanted to be reminded of always doing the mitzvahs, but the bigger talis obviously does a better job at engulfing us than the smaller talis does. Um, I'm thinking we should stop here. Yeah, we're not gonna go further over here because yeah, that would be too much. Um, just thinking, yeah. Okay, so to end off, well, actually, I want to end up with one more point, because we discussed, um, what about, um, what about women and tefillin? There's an interesting article on Chabad.org because I figured you might train it. Um, historical exception. Do they talk about the spiritual part behind it? Yeah. The Kabbalists, so just at the end of the Chabad.org article, they explain the technical reasons, but it says like this, it says, on a deeper level, the Kabbalists explain that although for mystical reasons, um, oh, women do not put on tefillin for mystical reasons. Because there were women throughout the ages, the reason why there were certain women who put on tefillin is because of their specific type of soul. That, in other words, there is a
Yeah,
possibility for
where I
women.
put
Huh?
oh,
Say it again?
sorry, Rabbi. It was a question for my husband.
No worries, no worries. So there is a technical possibility for women to put on tefillin. Many people have heard of Rashi's daughters. or there was Michal, the wife of Shaul, the daughter of Shaul, who married King David, who put on tefillin, and um, and the reason the Kabbalists explain there why they put on tefillin, even though generally women do not need to wear tefillin, is because of their specific root soul that they had. They were a reincarnation of a male, which is rare. But being the spiritual people they were, they knew that, and therefore they put on tefillin. But again,
Which
generally,
woman? Sorry.
the women in history have put on tefillin. Some say Rashi's
Like
daughters.
Rashi's daughter?
Right. The reason the Kabbalists explain, you can look at this in the Chabad article, it explains that they had generally, mystically, women should not put on tefillin either. They don't need it. But they were reincarnations of male souls, which again is a rare thing, and
Oh.
therefore they put on tefillin as well.
Well, he didn't have any sons.
They didn't have any sons. Okay, so that's well, no, Rashi's daughters had sons.
No, but Rashid didn't.
Rashi didn't have sons. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, he didn't have any sons yet. So, anyways, the point is that, as I said earlier, just because these are the mitzvahs we spoke about today were specific to men, the ideas here apply to all of us. And like I said, we believe mystically women have these elements already. They don't need the film to remind them to do this. But the general idea is that really every mitzvah we do, that's the important part. Every mitzvah we do, whatever mitzvah you're doing, allows the divine light to shine in you in a very specific way, in a specific part of your life. And so you can study the meaning behind many, many different mitzvahs, whether Shabbat candles, Hanukkah, Purim, Pesach, all the different mitzvahs. As you study each mitzvah, you can find out the specific divine light that you're going to become subsumed in. I think when it came High Holidays time, I spoke about the different uh, I went through some of the holidays and explained the deeper spiritual meaning of them. But that's the idea. Is number one, before we do a mitzvah, we accept upon ourselves God as the king. We're going to do what he says. But that's me accepting what God's going to do. Then the actual mitzvah allows God's divine light to flow within me and every mitzvah is going to be a little bit different depending on what mitzvah it is. All right, thank you for joining. And next week we will delve further into what happens if I have trouble feeling the feelings. In other words, it stays in my mind and I don't actually feel it. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
That's your
Thank you. Thank you.